Gaskins, do you see nature, nurture, both? You know, was he born bad? What's that? Who sees more nurture, I guess, heavier on that aspect? Okay. Those people, do we think some of it is nature? And if so, what parts could it be? Like, do we think people are born inherently good or evil? Is anyone taking that approach? Okay. Maybe, not really. So some genetic sort of component or spiritual component. Part of it, right?
There's
Yep.
a lot of scientific research into like the chemical imbalances
Mhm.
in your brains, and like it's been shown with multiple different cases that they're like through injury or whatever, something causes them to have a different sort of brain function than a
Yep.
regular.
There's definitely imaging stuff to support that, and I think we talked a little bit with Gaskins, right? That when we think about the physical abuse that he suffered from a very early age, and the idea that frontal lobe damage was likely, right? Which we know, like, what does your frontal lobe do again? Character and personality, certainly, right? So people with frontal lobe damage, we've seen personality changes in more violent outbursts more easily. What else could lead him? What kind of biological causes could cause somebody to be more prone to violence or violent outbursts, or, you know, more readily angered or something like that? What kind of hormones or brain structures are associated with that kind of stuff? Noradrenaline, yeah. People that are sort of edgier to begin with. Low frustration tolerance, right? That can be a frontal lobe. We talk about like the amygdala. Remember, the amygdala is your sort of biological id. So what does your id do according to Freud? Anything it wants to do, which can be violence, easily aggression, right? Sexual desires, things like that. You want, you take, you want, you take. So that's Freudian, so that's sort of a personality concept. But we know that we have our amygdala, which is an actual brain structure, which is a similar sort of drive-focused thing, right? So that's another area that can cause somebody to lash out faster, take what they want, right, without consequence. Obviously, we believe that he has low empathy, right? Doesn't feel others. One thing that I think was particularly interesting, did you guys pick up on the part where he talks about that he was close enough to his mom and daughter and their kids that they got together fairly regularly? And then in another part, he says, like, when he felt that bothersomeness that he talks about coming on, he said he'd get out and go for a drive. That's where this whole coastal highway thing started. Do you remember why he did that? Yeah, he said he wants to be far away from, the wife and children, because he would be afraid that he would hurt them and lash out at them, right, if he couldn't control himself. So that's, to me, a sort of different side and a little bit separate. Like, you imagine now he's sitting down at Sunday dinners with the grandkids, right, and he's got enough of a conscious or something to get away from family members, because he says he doesn't want to hurt someone he cares for. So how does that change you when you think about this monster with no empathy, right, and the things that he did and the way that he felt about them, the, total lack of remorse, which he says right up until the end. And then you picture him, with like some grandkids on the knee, like, sitting around and chatting with mom. So how does that happen in the same guy? I mean, he's not like, we're not talking about split personalities here, right? This is one guy, one personality. Sure, right? So he has some morals, though. Just not all of them. Just not many of them, right? So there's part of him at some point that somehow internalized, family being important. It doesn't seem like he had a great childhood, and we know he was physically abused. We know he was sent to reform school. We know he did terrible things. What's that?
He raped his own sister.
Well, he raped his friend's sister, but still, they're close enough, right? She was 11, so. But then he's got a daughter, and he's got an ex-wife and a couple failed marriages. He has one, I think he calls her his one legal ex-wife, but several ex-wives. He's got a daughter, he's got grandkids. He interacts with them, right? He talks about it, and he likes going to see family. He moved back to the area, so he could be near his family. And then he's still going out and starting on this sort of 20-year spree of killing, maybe 100 hitchhikers.
Well, didn't he want to do good? Like one point when he got out of jail, he wanted to do good and change.
Yes, he absolutely, earlier on, it sounded like he really wanted to change. Like when he first gets out, he comes home from a reform school, and that's where he's been brutalized by other students, by guards. There's a large, systemic problem with rape and abuse. And he comes out and he gets married, and he's like, I'm changing my ways. He gets a job. He doesn't want to ever end up there again, and he wants to do better. And then, do you remember what happened?
A girl.
Right. So somebody tells him off, makes him feel, and he almost kills her with a hammer, right? So then he goes back to jail. And then he gets out. And what happens then? So he goes back to jail, he gets out of jail again,
He's raped more, and then he kills.
rapes more, then he rapes that young woman, she's 14, right?
Statutory.
Yep. And he goes back to that, and when he goes back to jail, that final, well, at least for this time period, that final time, and he spends time with who he calls the three wise men, who are these 3 career criminals from New York, who teach him a lot of things. And you see throughout his story, he's like, oh, I remember they told me this, bodies that, or people don't go to jail for bodies that are never found. And so he internalizes some of their moral code, right? Because even criminals have a code, have things to live by. So he learns a lot of these techniques, and then that becomes, so instead of having a moral code or following society's rules or God's rules or anybody else's, he's following along this set of criminal rules and conduct, that he's become. So when he gets out of jail after that, instead of saying, he knows he never wants to go back, right? He never wants to go back to jail. But instead of saying, I'm going to change and do better, he says, I'm going to learn how to not get caught, right? So he knows at this point, he's not motivated to change, he's not going to change. So his big motivator now is not getting caught.
So maybe the family was just the front.
Yeah, absolutely, right? If you look like a family person, right, are you going to assume that the guy at Sunday dinner playing with his grandkids and, hanging around family is the guy that's raping and murdering up and down the Carolina coast? No, probably not. Yep, he can tolerate it. That's a good expression for it, too. He tolerates it. He needs that. Did you guys watch Dexter? Anybody? Right? So Dexter has to have a job, that explains his stuff, his lifestyle, his knowledge of things. And although he may grow throughout the series sort of to appreciate family on a different level, in the beginning, it's a front. He calls it a front, right? It's like he's got to look normal and act normal, and he looks to other people to see what that's supposed to be. So that's a good example of that too, right? How you can be a little bit of both.
I mean, it's almost at that point like a survival for them.
Yeah, exactly. It's necessary, right? Necessary behaviors.
They're not stupid. They know what they're doing.
Right, right. And this guy, I mean, when we listen to him, and he doesn't come off as this like highly intelligent criminal mastermind, but at the same time, he gets away with a lot of stuff over many years, and he doesn't get caught, and he finds a way he's got his whole like stolen car business on the side. He finds a way to finance his lifestyle. I mean, most of us can't figure out how to finance our own lifestyles, and he's, he's got these two things that he's got going on, right? He's got his false life where he sees his family. Although he's a criminal, he's still got a business going on, right? And then he's got this whole other life, which as he progresses after this first kill, it wasn't his first murder, but his first coastal kill that we talked about. And remember, after that, he feels great. He has a big steak dinner and he's driving home and he just feels great. So we talked about serial killers having that like cooling off period, right? Like that was the definition between them and a mass or a spree killer. So after an initial kill like this, that basically he's 35 when he commits this first coastal kill. So, and it sounds like from his description, this has been building his whole life, right? He's been looking for this and he feels the best he's ever felt. So he's got a little bit of a cooling off period after that, right? He doesn't feel that urge again for a while. And when he does, and he acts on it again, how long do you think, or which direction is it going? Is it going to build more and more? Right. It's like the same thing as somebody who gets, not the same thing, but similar to like drugs or alcohol, right? You need more of it, more frequently. The same stuff doesn't do the same thing for you anymore. So his kills are going to increase sort of exponentially over the years. So maybe it's something like 3 or 4 months between his first and second kill. And towards the end of this coastal kill run, it was 3 or 4 people a week he was picking up, right? So that's how these numbers could have gotten up into the 100 range, which he says it is. And he's smart enough not to get caught this whole time. He gets caught when he starts what he calls his serious murders, where he is plotting revenge on these people that he knows that he feels have done him wrong. So when he stops killing strangers and starts killing people he knows, the likely is more personal, and the likelihood that he's going to get caught too increases, right? So he's smart enough to get away with this stuff for a long, long time. So anybody with that kind of intelligence, we talked about, on that psychopathy checklist, they tend to get bored easily. So he's going to be filling his boredom with these kinds of criminal enterprises, so to speak. All right, any other thoughts on Gaskins for now, or development or things like that? So it seems like most of us are on there's both nature and nurture, but I think we're leaning more heavily on the nurture. Obviously, there's some genetic pieces, right? And then you think about things, we know some of the statistics, right, about people who are abused as children grow up to be abusers themselves. And it's 2016 right now, and we have awareness of these issues. We know these statistics. We have any number of agencies who are supposed to and try to help, right? We've got like Child Protective Services, we've got guidance counselors at schools, we've got court, we have family court, we have police officers who are trained in this sort of thing, and yet it still happens, right? Children still get abused, and they still grow up to be abusers. And no amount of intervention or early intervention is going to cure that, right? So, for Donald Gaskins, who was born in 1933 in the backwoods of South Carolina in a very poor area to a very poor unmarried mother, do you think if he went to school with a couple black eyes, CPS was going to be knocking on his door? How long do you think he probably even went to school for? Not very long, right? And say, one of his stepfathers knocked him around pretty good. Do you think he had any like neuropsychology to look for brain damage? Any counseling to talk about those feelings, right? So if we can't prevent it or try to prevent it in our circumstances today, in 1930s in rural, poor South Carolina, there was nothing for him, right? So even if he did have some genetic link, maybe if there'd been support, maybe things would have turned out a little differently. It's hard to say, but he certainly had zero help in the nurture department. Pretty much only got helped in the wrong direction. And then going to these reform schools and prisons, where you're supposed to at least get some structure and authority, he gets raped, beaten. The structure that he has is the structure of this inmate mentality and systemic raping and things like that. But still wasn't a nice guy, right? We don't have to feel sorry for him, but we can appreciate some of the situation, I guess, and some of the factors that led to that. All right, enough about him. Unless there's any more questions on that or something else that we talked about. Okay, so we're moving on now to sensation and perception, which is, for me, it's always interesting to see sort of what you guys think about it, because obviously we had to learn about the brain. Our brains affect our psychology. That's kind of go hand in hand, right? But when we talk about sensation and perception, like we're going to talk about today and Friday, we're talking about the actual physical process of our senses and our sense organs. So what are our senses? We have 5 senses, right? Okay, so what are they? Sight, hearing, smell, okay. Now, these are our 5 senses, right? Along with these 5 senses, we have our sense organs. So for sight, what is our sense organ? Hearing? Hears. Smell? Yeah, mouth, tongue. We'll say skin is generally to, all body sensation, right? Okay, so in a psychology class, why do we have to learn about the eye and the parts of the eye, which is what we're going to learn about? What does that really have to do with psychology?
That's the way you perceive
Your perception is your reality, right? Who says that most? Cognitive psychologists. Good. Okay, so if I'm cold, even if it's 100 degrees in here, and we know that, we have it scientifically measured, and we can all agree that 100 degrees wouldn't be considered by a general person to be cold, right? But I'm freezing. That's my reality. Nothing can change that fact for me. I can know it's 100 degrees in here. You guys can all tell me I'm crazy, but I still feel cold, right? If you're having, this could be an extreme example, but if you have a visual hallucination, your eyes are telling you something's there, right? You see whatever it is that you see, a giraffe in the room, right? So I can tell you that you're crazy and that, we all agree there's no giraffe in here, but it doesn't change the fact that you see a giraffe, right? People have auditory hallucinations all the time. And that can be any degree. What do we think of when we think of an auditory hallucination? What do we think of somebody having? Schizophrenia, and who's talking to them? Voices in their head, and who knows what they're saying, things like that, right? But on a less sort of extreme example, but it's still an auditory hallucination, they have found that survivors of the Holocaust and the death camps hear the prison guard march theme or whatever it is that they've sort of changed the shift to. They hear that all the time, or still hear it however many years later. They could be on their deathbed at 99 years old, in California, and still hear it and tell you that they're hearing it, right? So even though it's not playing, they're having a hallucination, but they're hearing it. Have you guys ever experienced anything like that? Yeah?
I was about 7 years old. I was playing outside, and
Creepy.
Yeah, and my parents were like, oh, it's just because you watch too much TV.
But you heard it.
Yeah.
Right. Anybody else? Stuff like that?
All I heard was real. Cameras,
But it was happening. Well, you weren't hallucinating then. Good. Jesse? Sure. I guess on that end we can get into the either you were hallucinating or there was the ghost, which, yeah, either way I'd be pretty disturbed by that, right? I heard, this happened to me recently, so I used to live in New York, and they have their like parades and stuff, right? But St. Patrick's Day, they had a big parade, and they have like the bagpipes and the whole thing, which I also associated with like if a police officer or firefighter died, they'd have a parade for them, and they'd often have the bagpipes and stuff. And I went through a period of a couple days, and this was like earlier this year, where I kept thinking I heard those like specific bagpipes, and I actually thought that there must have been like a televised parade or funeral or something on TV, and I went into that room and there wasn't, but like I heard the like New York City bagpipes that I associated with parades a couple times, which is really, I don't know, didn't come from anywhere. The TV wasn't even on, and it certainly wasn't on for like St. Patrick's Day, but I heard them. So yeah, so we do that, right? And a lot of the times we're not schizophrenic and there aren't ghosts, but our brains can sort of play tricks on us. We know that our brains do all sorts of weird things, right? So putting together some of these random memories and sensory input and things like that. So it's important, though, to understand, you know, when we're talking about these organs, these sense organs, that if information is coming in a not maybe entirely accurate way, it's going to affect our perception of the world in general, right? We can think of these, you know, instances here and there when things have happened, but if you have some sort of, you know, either physical problem with your sensory organ or something that's affecting the way senses come in, that's going to be very pervasive throughout your life. We can even think of small examples like, I have to wear glasses. Many of you guys either wear glasses or contacts or things like that. That's not an insignificant part of our lives, right? That's something that affects you on a daily, minutely basis. What happens if you have poor eyesight and you don't have your glasses? Can't see things, right? And that affects us a lot. And then you wear your glasses or your contacts, so now we've introduced a foreign tool, right, to our senses, which means they're going to be working a little bit differently, and that's going to affect things as well. So people that have limited sight, limited hearing, right? Does anyone here have any hearing problems? Okay. If you did, if you were not maybe fully deaf, but hard of hearing, wouldn't that affect your perception of the world and what you go through on a daily basis? And the same thing, some people have a horrible sense of smell. Some people have an overly strong sense of smell, right? I know people that like can't stand, like if somebody 50 feet away from them has perfume on or is smoking, or they smell things so strongly that it sort of affects their lives. So all this stuff, all this process of like detecting this raw sensory information is going to affect us, right? Okay, so how does all this information get in? We know it comes in through our sensory organs, and then where does it go first? Right, as it comes in through our sensory memory, it's going to go in short term or out the window, right? Maybe we decide it's not important. And then as it comes in through our sense organs, it's got to be converted to something that our brain and nervous system can understand, right? So our sensory organs are able to process and then convert this raw data, this sensory data, into what kind of information does it need to be in order for our brain to process it? What kind of form does it need to be in? What does our brain understand? what was it? Chemical, maybe electrochemical, right? Like a neural impulse or a neuron firing, right? Our brain doesn't necessarily understand like cold, but it understands when our skin tells it by transforming that information to a neural impulse that things are cold, right? So it has to be transformed. So there could be, when we think of a multitude of ways in which we sense things, there could be problems with the information getting in. There could be problems with the information getting to the appropriate organ, problems with the neural impulse or how it's coded appropriately, right? So there's a lot of things that sort of have time to go wrong along the way. All right, we are going to start or do our first, we'll do sight or vision, all right, our first sense. So vision, or what we see, or our sight, obviously our eyes are the organ, and we are seeing basically what our brains create, a picture that they create for us in response to light waves that are coming in, because that's how we get our visual information, through light waves, right? Light waves coming in. Do you guys know the properties of waves in particular?
You mean frequency?
Different, yeah, frequency is one. There's a couple other. So what's frequency? If this is our light wave, what would the frequency of this wave be? How frequently it cycles, right? Frequency is how many times. So in this cycle, how many complete waves do you see? 4. So this frequency would be 4. Okay, so that's how many times a wave crests or completes a cycle. Okay, so that's frequency. And then we have something that measures the height. What was it? Amplitude. The amplitude is the height of the wave. And then we have something that measures the distance here. Wavelength, right. So we're talking about vision, the amplitude of the wavelength. Any guesses as to what that might control? Sorry?
When it comes specifically to light waves, or just
Yeah. What is amplitude with sound waves? How loud it is. To me, this makes sense, but what's the equivalency of loudness with brightness, right? So amplitude is going to determine how bright things are for us. So bigger amplitude, louder noise, brighter light, right? What about color? What do we think that's controlled by? Wavelength, right? We know that we, as humans, can see a large and very varied color scale. Somebody from the earlier class suggested or had heard that women are more capable to see a greater variety of color and wavelengths. What do you guys think about that? Well, let's ask the men. Like, how many, you men in this class, how many shades of like blue do you think there are, or could you name? Dark and light? Yeah, right. Okay, and the women? There's a lot, right? And it's not just that we can name them, but I can look at, two of you in this same field, color shirt, right? But discern a difference and describe the difference, whereas men maybe wouldn't. Now, I don't know if that's just a priorities thing, but we do know that men are more likely than women to be colorblind, and that colorblindness does not necessarily mean you only see black and white. Is anybody colorblind? Okay, so a lot of times it's either red, green, or blue, yellow, so they can see either red or green. So there's varieties of colorblindness, and men are much more likely to be colorblind than women. So maybe they do see less shades than others.
So if they want to see a strawberry, it's going to be green or yellow?
Yeah.
like one time my cousin hit his head while we were at the park and he's colorblind, and his mom was wearing a green shirt
I don't see that one. Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. And that's another thing you think about, like going through life and not telling colors apart. That could be a bummer, right? That's kind of not that fun. Well, that's why they have to know the shape, the octagon. Didn't you have to do that for like your driving test?
And then the traffic lights.
Things can be challenging. Red and green, top bottom, right? But you've affected, like that's pervasive in your life. You have to learn how to cope with that, just like other people have to cope with other, more obvious maybe physical disabilities. That's like a silent one that people we don't appreciate as much how tough that could be. All right, so we know that light waves are coming into our eyes, right? And our eyes are going to be our sense organs. So, some good drawings here of an eye. Okay, so if we're going to look at our actual eyeball, we'll look at it from a side view. So this person, this is a side view of their eyeball. So which way are they looking? That way. Okay, so we all know what we're looking at, right? No. Nobody has to draw this. Kind of looks like a fish, though. Yeah. All right. So, this is our eyeball. So if this person is looking this way, who knows what part of the eye this is? Pupil. Cornea is like the layer that goes over the outside, the slimy layer that's supposed to protect your eye. Okay, so that would be the sort of, I guess, all over the front of it. This part is the pupil, and that's the black part, right? All right. So what's this part? The iris. And how do we describe that?
Has a color.
Yeah. Okay. So light is going to come in, say this light wave, it's going to come in through the pupil. The iris is the muscle that contracts or relaxes that determines the size of your pupil. So you guys have looked at the black part of your eye, right? And sometimes it's bigger, sometimes it's smaller. When is it bigger?
When there's
Dark, night, lower light. Okay, so it opens up to let more light in. Have you guys gotten your eyes dilated at the?
Yes.
Okay. And so do you have to wear those like big, awful shades, right? Because too much light is getting in and it can be painful for you, right? Okay, so when your pupil contracts and is tiny, like a little pinprick, how much light is getting in? A little bit. So if you were out in bright sunlight, your pupil might contract to sort of, lessen the amount of light that can get in. So the light rays come in, and then they go through this, which is going to bend and sort of refract the light rays. What's that going to be called? Lens. It does. Good. So when the light rays come in and the image gets in, the lens, as a lens will do, you guys have played with like a lens and stuff, it flips the image upside down when it projects it onto this little movie screen. What's this called? What's at the back of your eye? Anybody? Retina?
Oh.
Okay. So our retina is like our little movie screen, and this contains all the receptors for this information that's coming in. So these receptors are rods and cones. All right, so we've got all these little receptors, so the image gets refracted onto here after going through the lens, and that's where we get our actual little picture here. Rods and cones determine light, what's the word? Less fuzzy. Like fine details, things like that, light, color, focus. Okay. All right, and then we have all of us a blind spot, right? Not the blind spot that you have like when you're driving, but an actual blind spot where our eye doesn't see anything. Now we don't walk around with that blind spot in life, right? When we walk around, we see the full picture. Why do you think that is?
Because maybe our brain never responds.
Yeah, our brain fills it in. It's like, well, based on everything else I see, right, I'm gonna just fill in this little bit of blind spot. The blind spot is back here because this, the optic nerve, has to attach somewhere, right? So that little spot where it attaches is a blind spot because we can't have any receptors there, no rods or cones. So our brain fills in the information and it's converted now to a neural impulse that's going to what part of our brain? Occipital. And even more specifically, what part of the occipital lobe? Somebody said it, I think. Visual cortex. Good. Which then decides what to do with it. Tells it to the occipital lobe. Occipital lobe tells the frontal lobe, because the frontal lobe is sort of in charge of everything else, right? Okay. So, seems pretty straightforward. Not a lot of chance for things to go wrong. But we do have a lot of stuff happening. What can go wrong? What are some problems with vision? I mean, I have one. What? What's that? Yeah. Okay, so I am mostly nearsighted, which means I can read my computer screen with or without glasses, but I have a much harder time seeing things that are farther away. So nearsightedness happens when the image that's coming in gets focused a little bit too far in front of the retina. So it's a problem with my projector system. So that blurs the distant objects. Nearsightedness is called myopia. Is anybody besides me nearsighted? It's probably the most common vision problem. And anybody farsighted? Okay, so you can see things farther away better than up close, right? That is when our image is focused a little bit behind the retina. So your projector system is a little bit on the other side of the problem. That's called hyperopia. That's farsightedness. Now, does anybody have parents or grandparents that when they read a book, they're reading it like this, right? It goes farther and farther away. Okay, so as we get a little bit older and into middle age, our lens in there becomes less flexible, becomes a little more rigid, which means that people start to have trouble reading or focusing on up close nearby objects. So that's why you'll see everybody, as you get older, it goes further and further away. That's presbyopia. Okay, what about peripheral vision? What do you guys know about peripheral vision? Side to side. And when you kind of catch something in your peripheral vision, do you get like a bright, clear picture of it? No, how does it come through? A little blurry, like, that out of the corner of your eye thing? Okay. Does anybody know how far back our peripheral vision goes? Well, yeah, it goes like 180. So what percent of our visual field? Okay, take both hands and go out in front and look straight ahead. I'm going to look at Titania. You look at me, okay? Now, start moving your hands apart and then stop when you can't see them anymore, but look straight ahead. I'm here. Is everybody else? So everyone's at about the same spot, right? So it's about 180 degrees or 50% of your visual field. But as we get farther and farther away, what happens? It's less and less sort of what you can see and what you can make out, right? So if you have poor peripheral vision, how might that affect you? driving. Yep.
You have one narrow focus, you can see what the big picture.
Yeah, narrow focus. I don't know about you guys, but if I had that, I would be scared all the time because things would sort of like come into your visual field. Like now we get a little bit of time, like I sing, like approach, right? But it would be like people jumping out in front of you all the time. It would be startling, an interesting way to go through life. I don't think you could legally drive. Yep.
Can that happen to dogs?
Yes.
Because every time I like walk up to my dog, I get scared.
Yeah. We and they can lose their peripheral vision, and different animals have different ranges. Like I know stuff about horses. Horses actually have bigger peripheral vision. They can see stuff further back. They cannot see directly in front of them, and yes, that's why when they put blinders on them, they tend not to get scared of things because they don't see anything coming. Those are all true facts. And it is hard to see stuff right in front of you, although we can see it, right? But they can't. Their eyes are also set differently. I would imagine, although I don't know amongst other animal species, that it has to do with where your eyes are set, right? Our eyes are here, like horses have eyes further back, whereas some dogs in particular can have more narrow set eyes, different breeds and stuff. So obviously the mechanics of that are going to affect all their peripheral vision too. Okay, what happens when you are outside in the light and then you walk into a dark room, or you're getting ready for bed at night and you turn the lights off? You can't see anything, right? Right, that's because when we go from light to dark, it's our rods that allow us to see better in dim lighting, but they are very slow to react. So those receptors are slow. So you turn the lights off and you have to wait, right? You can't see anything at all. But after a little while, you can, right? You become more and more accustomed to it. So that's dark adaptation, and the reason it takes us longer is because our rods are slower to react. What about the opposite, when you go from a dark room into a light room? It's like you're almost like blinded by the light, right? It gets very bright, but it's faster.
Is that like when you're inside all day, like fluorescent light, and you go outside, it like, takes a minute for your eyes to adjust?
Absolutely, right? And the more that happens, like the longer you're in fluorescent lighting and stuff, the worse it gets. And also think about, do any of you like wear sunglasses a lot? I wear sunglasses a lot, and I find that the more I wear them, the more I need them. Like my eyes become more and more sensitive to light. So just like anything else, you can sort of train your body to some extent. Like if you never wore sunglasses, you do better without them, right? So we can sort of train our vision to adjust to things just like we can accommodate anything else. Now, color vision we talked about, right? Men tend to be colorblind. In general, color is produced by the different wavelengths, and theoretically we can discriminate like millions of colors. Now, I don't know that I've ever seen a million colors, right? But in theory we could. Now, there's a couple different theories on color vision. Similar to a lot of stuff we've learned, there's some older theories that then combine to form the modern sort of accepted theory, okay? So your homework for today, for class Friday, is just going to be to read up in the notes and your text. You're going to read about trichromatic theory and opponent process theory. Again, I sent you some of this in the notes, and you can look in the textbook as well. And just those are the two older theories on color vision. So I want you to get familiar with them. And on Friday, we're going to talk about the dual process theory, which is a combination of some of those older theories and the modernly accepted theory on color vision.
What was the second thing?
Opponent process.
How do you spell first?
What was it?
Trichromatic.